Welcome to this YSL SQL Server 2017 tutorial. This video gives you a quick guide to installing SQL Server 2017 Developer Edition. The video is designed mainly for people who've either been on a YSL training course and want to practice their skills at home, or for people who are following along with one of our video tutorials and need an instance of SQL Server to do that. It's definitely not intended as a comprehensive administrator's guide to installing and configuring SQL Server. This is just going to show you the bare minimum to get up and running as quickly as possible. So the things we'll cover in the video, we'll start with a quick discussion of the free editions of SQL Server 2017 that you can get, and a bit of advice about which one to pick. We'll then go through the SQL Server installation wizard to configure a basic SQL Server instance. Once that's been installed, we'll look at using SQL Server Configuration Manager to make sure your SQL Server service is running. Then we'll look at how you can quickly install SQL Server Management Studio, so you have a nice graphical user interface for interacting with your instance of SQL Server. And we'll finish off by installing a quick sample database just to make sure that everything's working as intended. So let's get started. The fairly obvious and easy way to get started here is to have a quick Google for SQL Server 2017, and that should fairly quickly land you on Microsoft's dedicated product page for SQL Server 2017. You can get lots of information from this page, so for example, if you weren't sure which edition of SQL Server to install, you can have a quick click on the editions link here and have a quick comparison of the 4 different editions available. 2 of these editions are free, so Express and Developer are both free. Express is a smaller cut-down version of the product which lacks a lot of the features, whereas Developer is a fully featured version of the product, but it has one important restriction: it's only licensed for testing purposes, not for production. So you can install SQL Server Express and use it to run a business if you like, but you can't do that with Developer. You can only use it for essentially practicing, which is exactly what we're going to be downloading it for. If you did want to install SQL Server Express, just beware that it does lack a few of the important features. For example, if I look at the business intelligence category, SQL Server Express lacks the SQL Server integration services component, which is something, of course, we've got training courses for integration services and video series on that. So if you wanted to follow along with those video series, then you need to make sure you install Developer and not Express. Assuming you know which version of the product you want to download, you can head up to the top of the page and click the Downloads link, and that will open up this separate SQL Server Downloads page. Now this gives you options again to download various different editions. The one we've identified is the Developer Edition. So if we click the Download Now button, that will start downloading the separate SQL Server installer package. It's only a very small file, it shouldn't take too long to download, and once it has finished downloading, depending on exactly which browser you're using, you can choose to open the file in a variety of different ways. So in Chrome, one way is just to click on the file itself, or I can click on the drop down arrow and then choose to open it, just to run the basic installer tool, and then confirm that I want that to happen by clicking yes. The installation tool gives you 3 choices. By far the simplest thing to do would be to pick the basic option, which just installs the bare minimum components required to run a SQL Server database engine on your machine, with the default configuration, the default name, etc. The custom option takes you through a wizard that lets you choose every last aspect of your installation, and that's essentially what we're going to be doing. But because I might be doing this multiple times, and perhaps I want to do this on multiple different machines, I don't want to have to download the installation files all the time. So what I'm going to do first is choose to download the media so that I can then copy them across a range of different machines later on. If I click Download Media, that takes me to a separate page that asks me exactly what I want to download. I'm going to download the cab file rather than the ISO, just to avoid having to mount the file afterwards. I then need to choose a location to install it, so I'm going to hit the Browse button here, and I'll place this somewhere on my machine, somewhere I've created a folder for it, Software CD, and then I've got a little folder here called SQL 2017. So if I click OK and then click the download button, that's going to take a little bit of time to finish, so I'm going to pause the recording at this point and come back when that's done. Okay, so that's all finished with. I can now click the Open Folder button to see the files that I've downloaded. Now, essentially at this point, we're done with the installation tool, although we could click Previous and then Previous again and choose to go with a custom installation and then point it to the files we've downloaded. There's no real reason to do that. So at this point, I'm just going to close down the installation tool altogether and confirm that I want to exit. What I can then do is find the executable file that I've downloaded and simply double click to start the installation process, clicking yes to confirm that I do want to do it, and then click OK to confirm where I want to extract the files that I've downloaded. So if I click OK, the extraction process begins. I'll get a new folder appearing in my download folder. And then eventually what will happen is the actual installation tool, the configuration tool for SQL Server will appear. This looks like it might be taking a little while, so I might just pause at this point and then come back when that next installation tool is loaded. Now there's an awful lot we can do with this tool, but as I say, this is meant to be a quick guide to installing SQL Server, so let's head straight onto the installation tab. We've got several things we can choose to install, but the starting point should be the top option here, New SQL Server Standalone Installation or add features to an existing installation. So if you do need to modify your installation afterwards, you can come back to this exact same page and then just click the same link as though you were beginning a brand new installation. So this will launch our installation wizard, and this will start leading us through the various steps involved in installing SQL Server on this machine. So there are several checks going on. First of all, checking if there are any product updates to install, which there weren't, and then scanning for setup files, which it's now found. Then there's a few rules to check that it's able to install SQL Server on this machine. It's passed all of those. There is a little warning about having the Windows firewall running. So if you wanted to see what the warning actually was, you could click the warning option. So just to essentially saying that if you want to be able to connect to this server from remote machines, you'll need to make sure the available ports are open. Anyway, we don't need to worry about that for our basic installation. I'm going to click OK and then click Next to start choosing what type of installation I want to go for. Now on this page, you get access to any existing instances of SQL Server that are installed on the same machine. So you can see that I've got several from previous versions of SQL Server, a couple of SQL Server 2016 instances and one for SQL Server 2012. And I've also got an existing instance for SQL Server 2017 already. If I wanted to modify any of those, I could choose the Add Features option and then choose the specific instance. But here we're going to choose to perform a brand new installation of SQL Server 2017. So with that option selected, we can click Next. We then get to choose which free edition we want. So even though we chose Developer originally, we can still choose to switch to Express at this point if we wanted to. But let's stick with Developer as we've discussed. We can then click Next, and then we get the licensing terms. And of course, we can quickly read those. We've seen this sort of thing many, many times, and then check the box to accept the license terms, and then click Next. Now, the main part of this dialog box, the most complicated part here, is choosing exactly which features you want to include within your installation. There's a little note here, by the way, for anyone looking for installing reporting services. The installation for reporting services works much differently in SQL Server 2017 than it has in previous versions. So I'll have a quick separate video on how to install reporting services. For now, let's just have a quick look at what features we need to install to get SQL Server up and running on this machine. Now, if you're not sure what a feature does, you can click on an item in the list and then have a quick read of the brief description shown in this panel here. If you want something a little more comprehensive than that, then there is, of course, a separate page on the Microsoft Docs website which explains in detail each feature you could choose to install. Again, we're just going for a quick guide here. I'm not intending to explain every single last one. I don't think I fully understand every single last option myself. If you went for a basic installation, what you would have gotten was a database engine service, and then I also believe you'd get the client tools connectivity shared feature. You might notice there's a couple of sections here. There's an instance features. Now these are options specific to this particular instance of SQL Server. And then there's also a shared features. So this little section here is for options that will apply to every instance of SQL Server 2017 that you install. So because I've already previously installed one instance of SQL Server 2017, I previously chose to include Client Tools Connectivity and Integration Services. So if you wanted to follow along with SQL Server Integration Services videos, make sure you check that box. What I'm going to do in this example is I'm going to make sure that I've got the Database Engine Services option checked, and then again, just for future reference, if you've attended an analysis services course in the past and you wanted to practice what you covered on the course, check the analysis services option there as well. So we've got database engine services, analysis services, and then there's also integration services selected, client tools connectivity, and then everything else I'm going to leave unchecked for now. As I say, you can always come back to the installation center and choose to modify an existing installation if you need to add more features later. But for now, that will be more than enough to get up and running with the basics. So let's click Next to move on to the next stage of the wizard, which will check some rules for the features we've selected. So we have a little bit of waiting to do to make sure that all the rules have been passed. And then it's going to move on to the step that asks us to configure the specific instance we're installing. So you may see again the list of previous instances that you've installed on the same machine. So I've already got one called SQL 2017. So I'm going to call my new instance SQL 2017 Training. If I hit the tab key, that will navigate to the next box and that will fill in the instance ID for me automatically. And then at that stage, I can click Next to move on to the next stage, which asks me to configure the server. Now you get to choose whether the services you're installing will be started automatically when Windows starts, or whether you'd prefer to have to start them manually. We'll talk a little bit more about how to start and stop services later on in the video, so for now I'll leave all these set to their default options. Also on this page, although quite easy to miss, are the collation options. If I click the collation tab, here I essentially get to tell SQL Server how to treat text. So for example, if I was writing a query, I can tell the database engine to treat the text as case sensitive or case insensitive, along with a variety of other options here as well, all of which can be customized, both for the database engine and for analysis services separately, if you're installing that component as well. For now, I'm going to leave all these options as they are. They can always be changed later. At this point, I'll just click Next to move on to the database engine configuration page. This page lets us choose what type of authentication SQL Server will use. The default option is Windows Authentication mode, which, as the name suggests, uses Windows credentials to connect to SQL Server. This is the mode that Microsoft recommend using as it's more secure than mixed mode, so that's the type that we're going to go for. What we do then need to do is add at least one Windows user who will act as the SQL Server administrator. The simplest thing to do here for demonstration purposes is just to add yourself as the current user, and you can do that just by clicking the Add Current User button. Once that's happened, you can also configure various other properties here, such as data directories for where various components are installed, and also configure how the temp DB works. But again, we're not going to change any of those things right now. We'll just click Next to move on to the analysis services configuration. There are three different modes for analysis services: multi-dimensional, tabular, and power pivot. We mainly run courses these days using tabular mode, so that's the type I'm going to go for here. Again, I'll need to choose to add a user to act as an administrator for the analysis services server, so the simplest thing to do is once again click Add Current User to add myself. And again, once I've done that, I can simply click the Next button to move on to the next stage, which checks rules for all the features I've configured, make sure that everything makes sense. And at that point, I can simply click the Install button to begin the installation process. Now, this is going to take quite some time to complete. So once again, at this point, I'm going to pause the recording and then come back when this process has finished. Okay, so we're all done and we've been presented with a basic summary of what's happened. Of course, you may see a different number of items here in your list compared to mine, depending on exactly which features you selected, and depending, of course, on whether you already had the shared features installed. Just in case you were wondering, you were keeping an eye on my system clock down here, then it didn't actually take 2 hours to install. I just got a bit hungry and went and had some tea. So anyway, I'm back now, so we can continue. So at this point, what we'll do is close down the installation wizard by hitting the close button, and that will return us to the SQL Server Installation Center tool. If that was your first instance of SQL Server 2017, you may have got a warning about needing to restart your machine. So that's a good idea in any case. At this point, I'm just going to close down the installation center and close down any other apps that I've got running, and then we will restart the machine and then come back when that's happened. Okay, so we're back after the restart, and the next thing we're going to do is check that our new SQL Server service is actually running. To do that, we can use a tool called the SQL Server Configuration Manager. And to find that tool, if you have a quick look in the Start menu and then scroll down to the Microsoft SQL Server options, you might have not quite as many as I do have installed at this point, but there should be a new folder now available called Microsoft SQL Server 2017. And if you expand that folder, you'll see a bunch of basic tools in there that were installed as part of your SQL Server installation. The first option in there, SQL Server 2017 Configuration Manager. Let's open that and then click Yes to allow this tool to make changes to our computer. When the tool is loaded, we need to click on the second item in the list on the left-hand side, SQL Server Services. And that will then list out all of the instances of SQL Server along with which services they have installed and shows you whether they're running or not. So the little green triangles indicate that it's running and the little red squares indicate that it's stopped. You might be able to make out there that my original instance of SQL Server 2017, SQL 2017, is currently running, but the new one, SQL 2017 Training, isn't, despite its startup type being set to automatic. This used to be quite reliable. You could pretty much guarantee that that setting the startup type to automatic would guarantee that it would start. But since Windows 10, I think I started noticing this, it's somewhat less reliable. Anyway, what we'll do is we'll start our new service by right-clicking on the SQL Server SQL 2017 Training option and then choosing to start it. And then we'll get a little progress bar indicating that it is attempting to start the service, and with any luck, when that progress bar finally disappears, we will have a running SQL 2017 training service. If you wanted to check that other services were running, so for example, there will be a separate service for analysis services, which actually is running and was set to automatic. And also up here, SQL Server integration services, which I actually already had installed before my new instance of SQL Server. Should you want to modify the startup type at any time, you can just double click on an item in this list. If I double click SQL 2017 Training, and then I can head to the Service tab of the dialog box, and then I can change its start mode using the start mode option there. I'm not going to bother in this case. I'm just going to click cancel, and then I'm happy that I've got my service running. I'm just going to close down the Configuration Manager tool. The next thing we'll do is install another tool that will allow us to interact with our SQL Server using a nice graphical user interface. The tool's called SQL Server Management Studio, and you may have already used this if you've used previous versions of SQL Server. Now, there are several ways we can get access to download and install this tool. A simple way would be to open up your web browser and Google for SQL Server Management Studio. But there's also a handy link available in the installation manager for SQL Server. So if I open my start menu again and scroll down to SQL Server 2017 and then expand that folder and look for the SQL Server 2017 Installation Center, this tool we used in the first place to install our SQL Server instance. When that's loaded, we can head to the installation page again on the left-hand side, and you'll find there's a handy little link there for installing SQL Server Management Tools. If I click that, it will just fire up my default web browser and essentially search for it for me, saving me the effort. So here we go. Here's the basic page for downloading SQL Server Management Studio. This page gives you access to the most recent edition of SQL Server Management Studio, but if you had a particular need or preference for an earlier version, then you can access those as well, with the previous SSMS releases link on the right-hand side here. There's a separate page available which will list out quite a large number of previous releases of Management Studio, so as I say, if you have a preference, you can access them from there. For this particular video though, we'll go with the most recent edition, which was released in April 2019. So all we need to do at this point is hit the download link to download the basic installer file, and then as that's going to take a little while, it's about 500 megabytes worth, let's just have a quick pause and wait for that to finish. Okay, so that's the download finished. All we need to do now is click on the executable to launch the installation wizard. That should take just a couple of seconds, and then when the page appears, there's not really much to do with this one. You can choose the installation location, which I'm not going to bother doing. I'll leave it as its default. And then all I've got to do is click the install button to make that start happening. And once again, at this point, I'm going to take a brief pause to let the installation complete, and then we'll come back when that's finished. Okay, so that's all finished now, and once again we'll need to restart the machine to complete the installation. But the good news is that's the last time, and we're just about ready to start installing a new database. So when you're ready, hit the restart button and we'll pause at this point and pick it up when that's done. Okay, so we're back after the restart. Let's just check that our SQL Server service is running. If we head back to the Start menu and scroll down to find the Microsoft SQL Server section, and then in there find Microsoft SQL Server 2017 and open that folder, open up Configuration Manager, click yes to allow it to make changes to the machine, wait for the list to appear, and our SQL 2017 training instance isn't running. So let's right click on it and choose Start to make sure that's happening. When the progress bar disappears, we'll close down Configuration Manager. And then what we'll do is we'll look for SQL Server Management Studio. So back to the Start menu again, and once again scroll back down to find SQL Server or Microsoft SQL Server. And then in this section, what we're looking for is Microsoft SQL Server Tools 18. So that's where your SQL Server Management Studio application is going to live, at least if you install the latest version, version 18, as I showed you on the website earlier. Anyway, if you expand that folder and then click on Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, that will start the application launching, and hopefully it won't take too long, although it can if this is the first time you've run the application. There we go. So what we need to do now is find the name of the server that we want to connect to. So the dialog box that appears to begin with asks you to connect to some kind of server. We want to connect to a database engine, and the one that's selected for us at the moment is the one that I previously had installed. So I need to change the instance. I can just type in, actually the simplest thing to do here is to just type in the name of the instance. Mine's SQL 2017 training. If you didn't know that and you wanted to browse for them, you can click on the drop down arrow and then choose to browse for more. And then you can have a look at the various different server types available, and you should be able to find your instance in the list there as well. When we've clicked OK, we can then just click the Connect button, and that will start connecting to our SQL Server. And eventually, the Object Explorer list on the left-hand side will show us a bunch of objects indicating that we're successfully connected to that particular instance of SQL Server. Now, of course, because this is a new installation of SQL Server, we won't have much in the way of data to play with just yet. We can expand the databases folder, but we don't see much in there apart from a couple of system-generated folders. So what we'll do, just to check that things are working reasonably normally, we'll install a sample database, which will be the Wiseowl Movies database. Now, I'll drop a link in the video description so that you can download this script. All we're going to do here is choose to open up a file, so you can do that from the Open button on the toolbar. And then we can browse to the location of the file. I've got this stored in so many different places. Here's one in one of my exercise files for one of our SQL introduction courses. So if I open up the Create Movies Database 2016 file just by double clicking on it, shouldn't take too long. It's just a big text file really. And then that shows us all the script. It doesn't matter if you don't understand any of this, it's not important at all. All I'd like to do is execute this script to create and populate our Wiseowl Movies database. So we should see a little executing query symbol, and then, yeah, fantastic. The script has finished running. So at this point, we can just close down the script. And then we can right click on the databases folder in the Object Explorer window and choose the option to refresh it. You can also refresh things by clicking the refresh button up here as well on the toolbar, little swirly blue arrow. So there's our movies database. Let's just check we can extract some data from it. We can either write our own query from scratch, but it's probably just easier for testing purposes to expand the movies database than expand the tables folder. And then we can find one of the tables, right click on it, and then choose Select Top 1000 Rows. So if I select that option, it will write a very, very basic select statement for me, extract all the data from that table, and then present it to me in a list. I say all the data, it's only selecting the top 1000 rows. If I wanted to make sure I get all of the rows from the table, I can remove the top 1000 part from the script if I just hold the Control key and roll the mouse wheel forward so you can see that a little more clearly. And then if I executed the query again by clicking the execute button or pressing F5, I'll now see all 1200 results appear from that table. Okay, so that seems to be working pretty well at this point. We've got a basic SQL or SQL Server 2017 instance installed. So we can use this now for various videos and various practice sessions from training courses at Wise Owl. So hope you found some of that useful. I appreciate it was a kind of a rough guide. It's not gone into a huge amount of detail, but there's plenty more literature if you're interested in the techie gubbins of how this works. Thanks for watching. See you next time.